David Crenshaw, the congressman from Texas, he lost his eye in combat. He has had surgery on his other eye, detached retina and cataract removed. Keep him in your prayers, please. He's effectively blind for the next month. He sent out a statement over the weekend. That's rough. My wife had a detached retina, several years ago. She had surgery, and my son had his tonsils and adenoids taken out the exact same day. Yeah, what a mess. I nearly had to take off work for 2 weeks, running back and forth between the two of them for pain medicine and all. It's miserable. And, of course, she still had a good eye. He does not. So keep the Crenshaw family in your prayers, please. Now, it is remarkable to me this story has not gotten a lot of attention. Two stories rolled into one down at the southern border. The Biden border czar announced her retirement on Friday. For perspective, she's been on the job for 80 days. 80 days on the job, and she announces her retirement. I do not think it was a coincidence that on the same day that she announces her retirement, she also announces, before she makes her announcement, she holds a press conference. Let me actually pull up the Reuters story and read this to you. This is unbelievable. This is the Biden administration. From Reuters, the United States is considering a conditional cash transfer program to help address economic woes that lead migrants from certain Central American countries to trek north, as well as sending COVID-19 vaccines to those countries, a senior White House official told Reuters on Friday. They're sending the Bill Gates one with the microchips. The potential program would be targeted at people in the Northern Triangle region of Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. Roberta Jacobson, the White House's southern border coordinator, told Reuters in an interview without saying who exactly would receive cash. Roughly 168,000 people were picked up by the Border Patrol at the U.S.-Mexican border in March, the highest monthly tally since March 2001, and part of steadily increasing arrivals in recent months. We're looking at all the productive options to address both the economic reasons people may be migrating, as well as the protection and security reasons. She did not provide a detailed explanation of how a cash transfer program would work. Wait a second. I got to go back to this clip. Hang on a second. I have played this clip more times than I care to, but it's relevant here. This is for March 22nd. I've kept this audio on file because I knew it would come in handy. This is the illegal alien who talked to Martha Raddatz from ABC News. Listen to this.
This significant surge coming after President Biden ended Donald Trump's so-called Remain in Mexico policy, requiring asylum seekers to wait there for their court proceedings. Since then, many of those tent cities along the Mexican border have emptied out as people start streaming in. We were there when a bus of 56 asylum seekers arrived at Casa Alitas, a Catholic charity shelter in Tucson. Men, pregnant women, and children stepping off the bus with only what they could carry. This father, who asked that we not show his face, traveled to Mexico from Brazil.
Listen to this.
With his
Listen.
wife and 3 young kids before crossing the border. Would you have tried to do this when Donald Trump was president?
Definitely not. Definitely. We had the chance, the same violence that's going on today was there last year. We used to watch the news, and I definitely won't do this.
So did you come here because Joe Biden was elected president?
Basically,
and we wouldn't have come here from Brazil. They watched the news. Now, Ilhan Omar got on TV the other day and said it's not like these people are watching the news. Except here's this illegal alien from Brazil, no less, who says that, yes, they did watch the news and they would have never have come here when Donald Trump was president of the United States. And now suddenly they're coming because Joe Biden is president. you have an illegal alien who admits on national television, ABC News with Martha Raddatz, no less, not exactly a conservative, that they pay attention to the news, would never have come here if Donald Trump were still president, but is coming because Joe Biden is president. The left is in complete denial that Biden's change of policies are causing this influx, despite this guy on television saying, well, anecdotes, not data. What do you think it's going to do? You've got, what's her name? Roberta Jacobson on national television and in the newspapers on Friday saying, we're going to consider a cash payment. Now, they're calling it a conditional cash transfer program. It's a cash payment. It's a welfare handout to illegal aliens who aren't even in the United States, just to keep them from coming here. They're bribing people to keep them from coming. You know what that's going to do? Supply and demand. It's going to cause more of them to want to come, or at least to agitate and say, hey, if you don't pay me cash, I'm coming to the border. What? How is it that the Biden administration doesn't have basic economic sense? Well, I guess when you've been raised by the wolves of the Senate your entire career, you've never had a real job. Of course, you don't know basic economics. Well, it is not I don't think it is unrelated. She gave this interview on Friday saying that the Biden administration is going to consider a program of cash payments to illegal aliens to keep them from migrating to the southern border. And on Friday afternoon, they tried to bury it. You barely heard about it. I wasn't even going to start the show with this. And then I was getting ready for it. It's like, holy cow. This isn't even a major news story. How is it not a major news story today? Roberta Jacobson to step down at the end of April. The border czar, Roberta Jacobson's last day in the Biden White House will be at the end of April before she retires, she announced Friday. The former ambassador to Mexico has been at the forefront of the administration's efforts to handle the surge of migrants at the border, which shows no signs of stopping. Her departure comes after there were more illegal border crossings in March than in any single month in 15 years, on top of record numbers of unaccompanied minors overwhelming government immigration and shelter systems. What? This is pretty much an admission, even though they're not using the word, pretty much an admission by the Biden administration that there's a crisis at the border. I know to admit that there's a crisis at the border would not be good optics. They're worried about the optics. They're worried not about how things are, but how things look. And they're worried about it. And so Roberta Jacobson, she's got to go. But she makes matters worse on the way out the door, saying, hey, we're going to give cash money to illegals to incentivize them not coming to the United States of America. Good gracious. And the summer's coming, and the flood of migrants is not slowing down even in the summer. Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas, was on television talking about this weekend.
Governor, there's plenty of Jane and John Does who are found, unfortunately, deceased out there in the desert. And then we also see these other pictures, like the 3- and 5-year-old girls who were dropped over the border fence, that 11-year-old boy the other day who was abandoned by the group that he was traveling with. And you wonder, where is the outrage on the left that we heard so much during the Trump administration to similar situations?
Well, you're exactly right. And that's what people need to understand, and that these horrific images and tragic deaths, as well as assaults that we're seeing right now, they would not be happening if the Biden administration had not opened up the border and been completely unprepared for the massive influx of the young migrant children that they are enticing to come across the border. Those deaths that you're talking about, those bodies that were found, that is only going to increase as the summer months get very hot. We see the deaths of the migrants coming across the border really increase in July and August, when typically the temperatures down there can be 100 or above 100 degrees. The temperatures are mild right now. The terrain as well as the temperature will be far worse in the coming months, and we believe that, unfortunately, the deaths will increase in the coming months. But this exposes exactly what the cartel's approach is. The cartels make money off of getting these children to come across the border. all the cartels want is to get money by delivering these children across the border. After that, they could care less what happens to them. You know, we had this story about the cartels throwing a young child, a 6-month-old child, into the Rio Grande River.
Yes.
And that's what they think about it. You saw them dropping those kids across the fence. These are very dangerous people who could care less about life. They're just trying to profiteer off of them. The Biden administration needs to crack down on these cartels, secure the border exactly the way that it was done before with the Remain in Mexico protocol, and make sure that things like these tragedies don't occur again.
And wait a second. So the cartels want money. They get the money by delivering the child to the border. They don't care about the condition of the child. Throw the child in the Rio Grande. And now the Biden administration is going to pay. They're going to pay cash money. Essentially, the Biden administration will be subsidizing the cartels to ensure the cartels don't bring kids up. This is where we are with the Biden administration. A buddy of mine just texted me and said, you know, maybe newsrooms across America would take this stuff seriously if we were taking all these illegal aliens and giving them jobs in the reporter industry. Give them jobs in the news field, and suddenly America's newsrooms would solve the border crisis. Probably not a bad idea. You know, they're coming after Substack again. Substack is an email newsletter the media despises because the people the media tries to cancel can get an email on Substack, and people can pay them. I've got a Substack newsletter. It actually helps me cover the cost of this program. And the media hates it. They hate all of this stuff, that you can bypass them. Well, you got to bypass them because they're carrying water for people like the Biden administration. How many of you knew Rebecca Jacobson announced on Friday cash payments to illegal aliens south of the border? And how many of you knew that 80 days into the Biden administration, she has decided to retire? Must be a tough life to work for 80 days and say, I'm hanging it up. And you know the Biden administration excuses. Well, she used to be the ambassador to Mexico. She's been at this for a while. Really? The fact that anyone with a straight face would believe that spin, that, we just wanted her for 80 days. No, she made the situation worse. You can't bring yourselves to say it's a crisis, but you know it is.
I really do like his opinion on things.
Erick.
Welcome back. The phone number 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. This weekend, I broke out my Omaha steak burgers. I also did fried onion rings and French fries. People are shaming me for drinking a Miller Lite. I listen, John Daly was quoted at the Masters this weekend saying he's a Miller Lite kind of guy. Been drinking it since he was 9. That guy, legend, hero. But I actually did my Omaha Steak burger. Y'all, they're really good. And you can get 12 of them for free right now at Omaha Steaks. What you do is you go to omahasteaks.com and you put Georgia in the search bar, Georgia. And when you do that, you will get their Let's Go Grilling package. You get butcher cut fillets, you get chicken breasts, you get sausage, you get so much more, but you get 12 burgers. That's almost 4 pounds of hamburgers for free. Now, you go to the grocery store, you're thinking, I'll just go across to the local grocery store and I'll get me some ground chuck. Well, here's the thing. The Omaha steak burgers are actually a blend. It's not just ground chuck, so it doesn't shrink up like ground chuck burgers do, where you got to use your knuckle and put a little divot in the middle. If you're making ground chuck burgers, you got to put a little divot in the middle. Otherwise, they shrink up and get these little balls almost. But nonetheless, you don't have to worry about that. With Omaha steaks, they're delicious. This whole package is an incredible package. Listen, the weather is fantastic wherever you are. It is deliciousness delivered to your door. And you get 12 burgers for free. And they're really good. If you saw me on Instagram this weekend, you saw me grilling on my fancy grill with my Omaha steak burgers. Go to omahasteaks.com. Put Georgia in the search bar. Up at the top, Georgia. And the name of the state, because that's where I am. Complications. We'll get into that later. But Georgia in the search bar. And then you get 12 burgers for free if you order the Let's Go Grill package. You can always do upgrades too. All right. To the phones we go. 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. Greg, you're going to be up first today. Welcome.
Good morning, Eric.
How are you?
I'm wonderful. Let's follow a classic Rush Limbaugh adage. Follow the money. You think people in these countries are going to see a red cent? First, the bureaucrats in Honduras and Guatemala, et cetera, will skim their cut. And then in a classic mafia shakedown, the cartels will take every other dime.
Mm-hmm.
This is such sheer stupidity. It is mind-blowing.
Well, you can tell this administration has no basic understanding of economics, of how this actually works. Of course they're going to. So, let's put in perspective, Greg, what's happening here. These people are fleeing the border because they're fleeing the Northern Triangle countries because of gang violence, criminal cartels,
Absolutely.
And a collapse of democracy. The Biden administration says we're going to start giving these people cash money. They're fleeing the gangs that are already shaking them down for money. Now the gangs are just going to come shake them down for more money.
Absolutely. It is just...
It's a basic
it's numbing
ignorance.
The stupidity of this administration.
It is. They're wasting money.
Vast ignorance.
Yeah, well, it goes beyond that. Greg, thanks very much for the phone call. There's something else going on here as well. Progressivism tends to think collective groups of people are bad and collective groups of people are good, individuals are bad. Conservatism, more realistic, more grounded in the way people are, thinks individuals can be good, but collectively we become a mob. And along the way, one of the things that I think conservatism, whether you're a religious person or not, you tend to understand that at root, people are flawed, whether you use Christian language, that they're sinners, or they're just that people have issues. I personally say people are stupid, and people are stupid. And if you understand that people are at heart flawed, sinners, fallen, however you want to talk about it, you have a better grasp of Adam Smith and economics, supply and demand curves. You understand people's self-motivation, people's greed, people's self-interest. You understand that when people get together in a mob, bad things tend to happen. I mean, I tell people all the time I'm a conservative because I'm a Christian. I believe we're all sinners, and I want as few in charge of me as possible. And that's why progressivism is anathema to me. The idea of a government bureaucracy in charge of me, a bunch of sinners in charge of me, is insane. The idea of the Biden administration thinking we can just throw money at these individuals and nothing bad is going to happen. I can tell you with just a basic grasp of economics, your average blue-collar worker out there who never went to college can tell you that bad things are going to happen when you send money south of the border to people escaping gangs. Of course, bad things are going to happen. Of course, bad things are going to happen. Of course, the gangs are going to shake you down. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand this. And the fact that the Biden administration does not is crazy. Now, I don't want you to take my word for it. You can read these stories yourself. If you text the word data to 33777, I'll send you back the link so you can see both stories. The Reuters story about Roberta Jacobson saying that they're going to give cash payments to these people, and the Axios story that she's retiring. And how many of you heard this on the weekend show? I unfortunately for this job have to pay attention to the weekend shows. They're nonsensical shows. They never cover the substantive news. They always want to fluff up the Biden administration these days. None of them talked about Roberta Jacobson leaving after saying we're sending cash payments, and yet it's actually major headlines. See them for yourself. Share them with your friends. Yes, it's my Substack newsletter, but you don't have to pay a thing for it. Text the word data to 33777. Again, you don't have to take my word for it. Read the Reuters report yourself. The United States is considering a conditional cash transfer program to help address economic woes that would lead migrants from Central American countries to trek north. Text data to 33777. When we come back, the Supreme Court has struck a blow for religious liberty, striking down the Ninth Circuit yet again, and the left is beside themselves that religious liberty might actually win the day. Hello and welcome. It is Erick Erickson here across the fruited plain. Beautiful weather where I am. I hope it is beautiful weather where you are. If you text the word data to the phone number 33777, I am going to send you back a link with the information on the border czar leaving after 80 days and wanting to pay cash payments. You're going to get two other links in there, by the way. I interviewed Tim Keller, Reverend Tim Keller. He's got pancreatic cancer. He wrote a book, Hope in Times of Fear. Great for the Easter season. You can listen to that interview and check out my daily Substack newsletter. Yes, I have a Substack. Everybody's got a Substack. The Supreme Court has struck several good blows for religious liberty of late. The editorial board at the Wall Street Journal has an op-ed on this. The first significant distinction of the newly constituted Supreme Court concerns the free exercise of religion from government control. The latest evidence is the 5-4 ruling late Friday slapping down another California pandemic diktat on the freedom of worship. The unsigned majority opinion in Tannen versus Newsom overturned an appellate court ruling that upheld an order barring meetings of more than 3 families to worship in a private home. California treats some comparable secular activities more favorably than at-home religious exercise, permitting hair salons, retail stores, personal care services, movie theaters, private suites at sporting events and concerts, and indoor restaurants to bring together more than 3 households at a time, said the majority. Such desperate treatment between religious and secular activities is barred by the First Amendment, as the court's precedents have long held. In a testy dissent, Justice Elena Kagan argues that the state rule passes muster because it bars both secular and religious meetings of more than 3 families in a private home. She was joined by Sotomayor and Breyer. The majority points out the burden of strict scrutiny in such cases requires the state to prove that meeting in private homes are more dangerous for COVID transmission than those in public settings. Is there really a difference between the risks at a hair salon or a theater than in a home? The state didn't try to prove it in the case of the plaintiffs who brought the lawsuit against the pandemic order. Chief Justice John Roberts was missing from action, failing to write or join an opinion while saying he would deny the application for relief from the California order. The ruling shows the difference on the court from the confirmation of Justices Brett Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett. At least on religious liberty, the chief is no longer the swing justice. The decision is the 5th time the court has overruled the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals on pandemic orders against worship. As an exasperated majority points out, the willfulness of the lower courts in defying the high court underscores how much religious liberty needs protecting against the militant secular values that now dominate American public life. I have a theory on this. The Supreme Court has now 5 times in a row struck down Ninth Circuit rulings that restrict worship under COVID rules. One of the things California has gotten in the habit of doing is very much like states like New York when there are gun rules. They keep the rule in place until the Supreme Court decides to take the case, and then gets rid of the rule before the Supreme Court takes the case and says, well, it's moot. You can't hear the case now. This is what the gun control people did in New York. Remember, New York City had a law that you were not allowed to take your gun out of your home except to go to a gun range within the city of New York City. And the case went to the Supreme Court and they scrapped the rule because they knew what would happen at the Supreme Court. And they said, well, the issue's moot now. And this is what California is doing with their religious orders in the pandemic. They get to the Supreme Court and they cancel the rule and say, well, you can't hear the case. And the Supreme Court said, actually, we're going to hear the case anyway. And they overruled the Ninth Circuit, saying that you've got to hold comparable standards. Now, what Elena Kagan points out in her dissent is that it didn't matter whether it was a religious gathering or a birthday party or a holiday celebration, no more than 3 families in a house. What the court is saying is that you're allowing multiple families and people in a box at a stadium for a game. That's kind of ridiculous when you're reducing the number of people in a private home who may sit outside. and ultimately still have to navigate and make decisions for themselves. California has done this repeatedly with worship services, and the Supreme Court at first, remember with John Roberts and the four justices of the left, John Roberts, who now I guess is more and more the moderate on the Supreme Court, allowed Nevada to treat casinos and churches differently. And I think that kind of radicalized some of the other members of the Supreme Court, saying this isn't right, that we are allowing these courts to do this. Amy Coney Barrett, I think, had stepped down or didn't participate. One of the justices, conservatives, didn't participate in that decision, and so it was Roberts and the liberals on the court were able to make that decision for Las Vegas. And now Amy Coney Barrett, Brett Kavanaugh, and Neil Gorsuch, Donald Trump's appointees, are striking back on religious liberty grounds. By the way, this is a bigger issue, and the left's antagonism towards this issue. I mean, there were really vocal meltdowns on social media over this case over the weekend, and it has nothing to do with this particular case. There is a case pending before the United States Supreme Court. They are awaiting the decision. In that case, the city of Philadelphia punished Catholic charities and demanded that they stop handling adoptions and foster care because, as you can probably guess, the Catholic charities did not wish to deal with same-sex couples and transgender people wanting to adopt or foster kids. Whether you like it or not, 2,000 years of Christian orthodoxy is marriages between a man and a woman. God creates us male and female. We don't get to do it ourselves. In fact, in Genesis, the word bara is used for God creates us male and female, meaning that's a word that only applies to God. We ourselves can't create in that way. And this is basic Christian orthodoxy. Whether you're Protestant, Orthodox, Catholic, it doesn't matter. God bara, God created us in a way that we ourselves don't get to create. So you can disagree with this if you want, but it's 2,000 years of Christian orthodoxy shared by like 2-3 billion people on planet Earth. And the city of Philadelphia came in and essentially told Catholic charities, you must give up your 2,000 years of common orthodoxy shared globally by Christians if you want to participate in this government program to help place kids in foster care or with families to be adopted. And the Catholic charities said, nope. And they had to sue. And this case has gone to the Supreme Court. As you can imagine, the writing is on the wall that the Supreme Court is going to say you have to allow people of faith to uphold their orthodoxy, and you've got to allow people of faith to participate in government programs without sanction against them for being unwilling to abandon their long-settled religious practices. Now, of course, the left throws out these crazy curveballs. Well, what if cannibalism is your religious view? I guess I get to still kill people and eat them. Well, actually, there are other standards of faith and standards in the Supreme Court that you can't cause bodily harm to someone. This, by the way, is one reason the left has moved on from sticks and stones can break your bones, but words can never hurt me, to words are literal violence. Because if you say something someone doesn't like who deals with these issues, that's got to be translated into violence. Why? Because there is Supreme Court precedent out there that you can believe whatever you want to believe as long as your belief does not inflict harm on someone else. If words are literal violence, then when you quote St. Paul in Corinthians on sin, including sexual sin, then suddenly you're doing literal violence to the alphabet gang. If Catholic charities can say, I'm sorry, we don't adopt to single people or we don't adopt to same-sex couples because it violates our religious beliefs, well, then you're doing literal harm to that person. Now, notice the little twist here. It's who is being harmed. The alphabet gang would tell you they're being harmed. What about the child? What about the child? Essentially, the state's argument in Philadelphia, the city's argument, is that we should reduce the number of places through which a child might be adopted because some of those places only want to adopt into two-parent heterosexual nuclear households. And so we should reduce the ability of a child to be adopted lest we offend certain other groups. And this Supreme Court case on Friday in California about the pandemic, that you can't treat sectarian and secular groups differently, you can't treat sectarian and secular situations differently, is actually a pretty big smoke signal that the Supreme Court is probably going to side with Catholic Charities. And so the left is more enraged by that than they are the actual COVID restriction, which, by the way, California got rid of to avoid this court ruling. In fact, when you read the decision, the majority opinion points out that this is increasingly a pattern on the left, that they will they will get rid of a regulation if it heads to the Supreme Court, knowing the Supreme Court might strike it down. And so the Supreme Court is saying, you know what, we're no longer going to just say this is moot when you do this, because you're very clearly doing it, anticipating our result. And in many of these cases, what happens is the Supreme Court has said, well, the situation is moot, they got rid of it. And the moment the Supreme Court does that, they reimpose the regulation and the lawsuit has to start all over again. Now, I have a suspicion. I think this is going to happen. And I think, let me read you this paragraph again. It's the last paragraph of the Wall Street Journal decision, or op-ed. The decision is the fifth time the court has overruled the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals on pandemic orders against worship, as an exasperated majority points out. The willfulness of the lower courts in defying the high court underscores how much religious liberty needs protecting against the militant secular values that now dominate American public life. I have a theory. If you will recall, during the Trump administration, progressives would find liberal activist judges to halt, overrule, delay, enjoin the Trump administration. The Supreme Court only takes so many cases a year for consideration. My guess is what's going to happen is the left now is going to use the left-leaning circuit courts and district judges to create so many cases that the Supreme Court can't take them all, or at least they think the Supreme Court won't take them all. So you get some bad court precedent around the country in ways that will make it harder for the conservative justices to make sure that the Constitution is being followed. So, for example, you may see a continued flood of pandemic orders that violate religious liberty. You may see a continued flood of orders upholding religious persecution engaged in by the Biden administration in ways that overwhelms the Supreme Court, such that the Supreme Court can't strike them all down. And you will see bigger circuit court splits. Now, what will happen is when there are circuit court splits, now, let me explain what a circuit court split is for those of you who don't know. The nation is divided up into, now, how many are there? How many circuit courts are there? There are 13. There are 13 circuit courts. Yep. The 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, and then the District of Columbia Circuit applies to cases that come out of D.C., and the Federal Circuit comes out of Federal Circuit has subject matter jurisdiction for patents, copyrights, and the like. So you got these 13 courts. The Trump administration was able to prioritize circuit court appointments and shifted a number of them to the right. But the circuit courts, what they typically do is they make 3 judge decisions. And so you could potentially get like 2 Obama court judges and a Trump appointee on this three judge panel for the circuit court, and it rules for the left, and then it's got to go to the full circuit. And if you overwhelm the system enough, you can get a lot of bad law. So circuit court splits come about when, say, the 11th Circuit and the 5th Circuit. The 11th Circuit handles Georgia, Alabama, Florida. The 5th Circuit handles Texas and Louisiana. And so you could get those 2 courts disagree with each other. So in Texas and Louisiana, the law of the land says X, and in Georgia, Alabama, and Florida, the law of the land says Y, because the circuit courts disagree. And you've got to follow what your circuit court says. And those are the cases that go to the Supreme Court. Whenever there's a major circuit court split, it goes to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court has to decide ultimately which side to go with. What I think we're going to start seeing is a greater number of circuit court splits around the country as the left, as best they can through the circuit courts the left still controls, create a bunch of decisions, just a slate of decisions that will ultimately force the Supreme Court to get involved. The question is, how many of these cases can the Supreme Court take in a year? And do they wait out? Maybe, they're trying to pressure Justice Breyer to retire. Clarence Thomas is getting up in age. What happens? The next 2 years are going to be very interesting to watch this fight play out. But I can tell you right now, there is a 5-4, and really it probably actually is 6-3 in a lot of these decisions with John Roberts. There's at least 5-4 majority on the side of religious liberty, which is great as Christian persecution ramps up in this country. Even though the left says it's not a thing, it clearly very much is becoming one.
News and in-depth analysis from Erick Erickson.
Hello and welcome. It is Erick Erickson here. The phone number, if you want to be a part of the program, 877-97-ERICK, E-R-I-C-K, 877-973-7425. Now, if you're a new listener, hi, those of you in Tyler, Texas. If you're a new listener, if you ever see a picture of me, I'm a fat white dude because I like to cook and I like to eat a lot. And so I put up recipes at ewerickson.com, and I have one coming out. So the last several times I've sent out recipes, every Wednesday, I send out a recipe, and people are complaining because they're all either they're on my smoker or they're on my grill, And some people, they haven't discovered the joys of a pellet grill or a big green egg. So they want something that well, it's dessert time this week, folks. My mother-in-law has a recipe for peanut butter Rice Krispie treats. Oh, yes, they are glorious, and they are easy to make. And so I'm going to send out a peanut butter Rice Krispie treat recipe this week. If you would like a copy of the peanut butter Rice Krispie treat recipe, you text the word recipe to the show number 877-973-7425. Text the word recipe to 877-973-7425, and you will get a link back. I will text you back a link. Now, I've got it automated. I'm not sitting here talking and multitasking. I mean, I multitask, but not like that. To all of you who text, so you'll get a link back. If you click the link, it'll open up a web form, and you just put in your email address. You don't get spam, you don't get ads, you don't get anything. You just every week get a recipe, and I will send you the peanut butter Rice Krispie treat recipe. I had bourbon and cigars with friends on the front porch last night. I used my smoke wing recipe, available on the website, and made the Rice Krispie treats, and they were delicious. I'm sure you all care. Here's what you should care about. Twitter is censoring people who dare to point out the founder of Black Lives Matters has bought a $1.4 million house in a predominantly white neighborhood in Los Angeles. Jonathan Turley has this. We've been discussing the expanded censorship of Twitter and social media. The latest example involves the story of Black Lives Matter co-founder Patrice Kahn Cullors, 37, and her purchase of a $1.4 million home in a secluded area of Los Angeles, whose population in this neighborhood is reputedly less than 2% black. The professed Marxist received considerable criticism for the purchase, including from Jason Whitlock, an African-American sports critic, who's also a critic of BLM. When Whitlock called out Kahn Cullors, Twitter censored the tweet, leaving a notice that it was no longer available. Last week, various sites like dirt.com reported, quote, a secluded mini compound tucked into LA's rustic and semi-remote Topanga Canyon was recently sold for a tad more than $1.4 million to a corporate entity that public records show is controlled by Patrice Kahn Cullors, 37, the social justice visionary and co-founder of the galvanizing and for some controversial Black Lives Matter movement. It produced a firestorm of critics who noted that Cullors has long insisted she and her BLM co-founder are trained Marxists. We're super versed on sort of ideological theories. Critics like Nick Arama of Red State pointed out, it's interesting to note that the demographic of the area are only 1.4% black. Jason Whitlock posted as well, and now Twitter is censoring people for pointing out the communist has bought into a wealthy enclave. Now, to be fair, in LA, $1.4 million could be a double wide, but it's in a progressive enclave of white people that she's decided to move into. Yeah. Very interesting, but you're not allowed to talk about it on social media. Greetings and welcome. It is Erick Erickson here. I would value your input. Well, maybe. I don't know. You can call in. You can try it. 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. I got to jump back to the last hour if you weren't here. I need to real quick, though, say hello to those of you in Tyler, Texas who are joining us. And also to those of you in Athens, Georgia, who used to have me 9 to noon and now have me noon to 3, as this show continues to evolve and step outside the bounds of Georgia to everywhere across the country. Delighted to have all of you with me here. Now, I got to go back to the last hour, because at the end of the last hour, I was talking about this Twitter story. If you haven't heard, the founder of Black Lives Matter, the co-founder of Black Lives Matter, has bought a more than $1 million house, a $1.4 million house, and it is in a predominantly white neighborhood in Los Angeles. What's so interesting is it's a $1.4 million house, and the neighborhood, Topanga Canyon, is 1.4% black, 98.6% white. Now, Twitter is not allowing you to discuss this subject, by and large, on social media. Even Jason Whitlock, the black sports commentator, has had his tweet automatically deleted by Twitter for daring to point out this woman. And they're claiming that it's doxing by pointing out the neighborhood she lives in. Somehow it's called doxing. That is revealing where someone lives for purposes of harassment. Well, they're not saying where she lives. Just pointing out that the neighborhood she is buying in is a lily white neighborhood in Los Angeles, and her house is $1.4 million. I feel like I should say, in fairness, that in Los Angeles, $1.4 million gets you a double wide in some parts of the city. The housing values out there are ridiculous, and this house doesn't look like a super substantial house. If I'm being fair, it's not a substantial house, but it's on land. It's a bit of an enclave unto itself, and it's surrounded by a bunch of white people. It's in a progressive, formerly hippie commune sort of area of LA. Of course it is. The fact of the matter is, though, that this woman claims to be a communist, and like all good communists, is living high off the hog while everyone else is expected to suffer and be miserable. Jonathan Turley, the lawyer, points out that she and her wife, she's married to Janaea Khan, a leader of Black Lives Matter Toronto, who published a best-selling memoir of her life and then a follow-up book. She has also signed a lucrative deal with Warner Brothers to develop and produce original programming across all platforms, including broadcast, cable, and streaming, and has also been featured in various magazines for her collaboration with Jane Fonda. And they've been eyeing other properties as well, including in the Bahamas. Makes you wonder what Black Lives Matter has been doing with its $100 million in donations. You know, Delta Airlines in Georgia harassing the state for passing voting reform and has hoisted the Black Lives Matter flag at its headquarters to the chagrin of a lot of employees. Now, we're used to, as conservatives, we are used to seeing progressives, liberals, be hypocrites, and the media never calls them to task. What is new is corporations censoring you from reporting on their hypocrisy, Twitter shutting them down. The rise of these woke corporations in America is coming for all of us. In Texas now, they're considering a voting reform bill, and they're using the Stacey Abrams playbook from Atlanta and Georgia. So the Texas legislature is considering election reform. In fact, Matt Schaefer, he's a state representative from Tyler, Texas. The state house in Texas has the legislation now. It's passed the Senate. They're coming for him and all the Republicans in the legislature. The left is. I'm going to have him on the program tomorrow to talk about what's happening in Texas is remarkably similar to the playbook that Stacey Abrams deployed in Georgia. They're rallying corporations to come after Texas and threaten boycotts of the state for passing a very reasonable election reform measure. I want to spend more time later on corporate America and what they're doing and how we can respond to it. Stick around for that. Right now, I want to spend just a few minutes here on the fluffing of the Biden administration by the American media. It's actually really remarkable what the media is doing at this moment as they come for Joe Biden. Let me read you this from CNN's John Harwood. John Harwood, keep in mind, he is supposedly some sort of objective political analyst for CNN. He's not really an objective political analyst for CNN. He's actually a very partisan progressive and has over the years taken stridently partisan progressive positions. And yet CNN, and he was at CNBC before this, puts him on. They allow him into the debates. I hope like hell that the Republicans, by the time we get to 2024, stop allowing the progressives in the media to hold the Republican debates. John Harwood was one of those in one of the Republican debates who would constantly ask these far-left wackadoo questions like, why can't you accept the fact that the icebergs are melting and Miami, Florida is going to be buried under the water, you bigots? Is it because they're Hispanic? I mean, the guy is a total partisan hack. If you follow him on social media, you see just how far left he is. And yet, of course, CNN values him as some sort of bastion of objectivity. Listen to this bastion of objectivity. Here's the headline: Biden strengthens Obama's legacy while seeking his own. With sweeping economic recovery plans, President Joe Biden seeks his own legacy like the New Deal or Great Society, but he's also bolstering Barack Obama's. In multiple ways, Biden has used his first 100 days to reinforce the battered foundations of Obamacare. He exercised executive authority to invite more of the uninsured to buy Affordable Care Act coverage, expanding marketing to encourage them, and provided larger premium subsidies as part of his $1.9 trillion COVID relief package. More than 500,000 Americans have already taken advantage, according to figures the administration released last week with the special enrollment. I'm sorry, this is like reading the script of a porno. Good grief. In his 2020 campaign, Biden resisted calls from his rivals in the Democratic left to embrace Medicare for all. But he's headed in that direction. Good Lord. And it's not just him. Jonathan Alter at the New York Times. Can Biden be our FDR? President Biden wants to change the trajectory of the country. He's off to a good start. History doesn't repeat itself, but it sometimes rhymes, Mark Twain supposedly said. If so, Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. could be a couplet. With a few breaks and the skillful execution of what seems to be a smart legislative strategy, President Biden is poised to match FDR's stunning debut in office. That doesn't require Mr. Biden to transform the country before May 1st, the end of his first 100 days. It's handy, all right, if arbitrary marker that Mr. Roosevelt, to the irritation of his successors, laid down in 1933. But for America to own the future, as the president promised last month, he needs to do amid the pandemic what Mr. Roosevelt did amid the Depression. Restore faith that the long distrusted federal government can deliver rapid, tangible achievements. With one of the biggest and fastest vaccine campaigns in the world and the signing of a $1.9 trillion COVID relief package, the president has made a good start at that. His larger aim is to change the country by changing the terms of the debate. Just as Mr. Roosevelt understood the laissez-faire policy of the 1920s wasn't working anymore to build the nation, Mr. Biden sees the Reagan-era market capitalism cannot alone rebuild it. Oh, dear God. I'm surprised he didn't choke writing that. Had so much in his mouth. Y'all, we're seeing this pattern from members of the media. Unremarked upon by most. We should note that what they're trying to do here is set boundaries for Joe Biden where he had no mandate to pretend he had one. Yes, Joe Biden won overwhelmingly, whether you think that the voters rejected Donald Trump or that they stole the election, whichever your belief is. The fact of the matter is, yes, Joe Biden on paper has millions of more votes than Donald Trump. But you also saw Republicans hold the state legislatures. You saw Republicans make gains in state legislative pickups. You saw the Republicans hold governor's mansions. You saw the Republicans come within 5. They're now within 2 seats of taking control of the House of Representatives. You've seen this. How exactly does Joe Biden have a mandate? He really has no mandate. Yet the supposed objective member, now Jonathan Alter is a left-wing hack. Harwood, of course, it pretends to be some sort of objective person. They want to claim that Biden has some level of mandate he does not have. They've got to build it up, and you need to understand what they're doing here. This is really, really important. John Harwood and Jonathan Alter, they're not talking to you. They don't really care about you. They're writing missives to the elite. They're writing missives to Washington. It's like tapping out Morse code into the brains of the opinion writers and the intelligentsia and the opinion makers. We got to treat this guy like he's got something big going on. We've got to treat his 100 days as remarkable, even though they're not. Ignore the border. Ignore COVID, ignore the fact that Donald Trump put him on track to meet a lot of these goals. Ignore all of that. Ignore that the border situation has been made worse because he scrapped Donald Trump's policies. Ignore all of that. On and on and on and on it goes. And they've got to ignore all of the bad and build this up for the opinion makers, for the talking heads, for the news anchors, so that you don't hear the alternative in the press. You don't hear the alternative anywhere out there. And of course, now you've got this organized effort to name and shame Fox News. Dear Lord, Brian Stetler on CNN actually did a story that Fox News should be taking vaccine selfies. Literally, the dude does a segment on why aren't Fox News personalities taking vaccine selfies like the rest of us? And then wanted to go after Tucker Carlson yet again. Clearly, CNN is obsessed with Fox and going after their advertisers because Fox, Newsmax, and the other conservative networks, but really Fox more than the others because it's got all the eyeballs, dares to tell you the other side of the story. They despise that there is a news network. That's why they hate talk radio, by the way. They despise the fact that we are out there able to share the other side of the story. Take, for example, if you weren't here in the first hour, Roberta Jacobson. Roberta Jacobson is the border czar for Joe Biden. 80 days on the job, she announces her retirement after announcing the Biden administration is going to give cash payments to illegal aliens to encourage them not to come to the border. Then she announces she's retiring. 80 days on the job, she retires. That was dropped in the news headlines on a Friday afternoon. You haven't heard about it since. Because if you did, it would be a recognition that they failed at the border. You're not allowed to hear about the failures. You're not allowed to hear that. We've got the media has a vested interest, no matter what Joe Biden does. If he runs the country into the ground, the media view will be, well, it's better than what we got from Donald Trump. Never mind explosive employment until the pandemic. Never mind that he proved all the experts wrong about Iran and proved all the experts wrong about moving the embassy in Israel, proved all the experts wrong repeatedly. And the chief goal that they're championing Joe Biden with, the vaccine rollout to so many people in the first 100 days, is a goal Donald Trump set for him. I'm old enough to remember last October when they said it would be impossible to roll out a vaccine before the end of 2021. It'd be 2022 at the earliest. And also, Joe Biden, he's hitting the goal. This isn't a criticism of Biden, and you need to understand this. Much as there's plenty to criticize him for. This is about the American media. The American media has a vested interest in doing everything they can to make Joe Biden look as good as possible, to contrast him with Donald Trump, to cover up any of the good stuff that Donald Trump did. And the reason is this: Republicans are charting a path forward beyond Donald Trump. There is a growing sense that Trump won't run again in 2024. In fact, it's notable this weekend, while the media focused on him bashing Mitch McConnell and Liz Cheney and the like, the media largely ignored that he had invited Ron DeSantis and Tom Cotton to address the crowd at this Republican National Committee gathering. Ron DeSantis is increasingly looking like the front runner, which is why the media is savaging him. What the media has to do is convince the American public not to believe their lying eyes, that they actually had a really good thing going in the economy and with jobs with Donald Trump, because they got to make Donald Trump all about racism and white supremacy and bad, so that they can build up Joe Biden as everything good, even when it's bad. Well, it's better than what we got from the last guy, even when it's not. If they repeat the lie enough, maybe you just might believe it.
He doesn't just have a radio show.
Hello there, it is Erick Erickson here. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. One more thing on this Biden stuff. Listen to this headline, unbelievable headline at Politico on Biden. Why big spending Biden can shrug off GOP warnings of inflation. This is the subtitle. I kid you not. This is the actual subtitle of a news story. If persistently rising inflation is coming to the United States, history suggests it won't happen until after Biden is out of office. Republicans are warning that President Joe Biden is taking a risky gamble that he can carry out his massive spending plans without triggering runaway inflation. Biden is betting on history as his defense. The specter of raging inflation, the erosion of consumer purchasing power, has become central to the debate about whether the government can afford Biden's multi-trillion-dollar Build Back Better program. But years can go by before soaring inflation ever takes hold. And Biden will probably be gone from the White House if the country finds out that his critics were right. And I'm sure the media will blame the incumbent president if there's an R next to that person's name. The U.S. experienced punishing double-digit inflation starting in 1974, and it stayed high through the early 1980s, dragging down growth and eventually sparking two crippling recessions. But the seeds were planted in the mid-'60s during Lyndon Johnson's free spending administration and were fostered along the way by extraordinary events like the Arab oil embargoes and federal policy missteps. Now Biden administration officials, economists, and even Fed Chair Jerome Powell say this time things are different. We're averaging less than 2% inflation for more than the last 25 years. Inflation dynamics do change over time, but they don't change on a dime. Biden has proposed a spending plan of more than $2 trillion for the nation's infrastructure, which include everything from building child care facilities to boosting Medicaid spending. It comes on top of the $1.9 trillion COVID relief package he signed last month, the $900 billion spending Congress approved in December. Yet another spending plan will be released this month. In fact, it's propping up the stock market right now. More money, what was it? Philip told me that works for me. So more money's floated in the stock market in the last year than the last 12, something like that, because of people's stimulus checks, day traders and the like have come back. I actually have a sneaking suspicion that we're going to see it sooner rather than later, because I actually believe that inflation started before Biden, towards the end of the Trump administration, when COVID hit and they started dumping money into the economy even then, and Biden has only escalated it. I mean, when you pay attention to prices out there right now and what's happening, supplies of things are drying up. And in supply and demand curves, this is basic economics. Everyone but a Democrat can understand. When supply is reduced and demand is high, the supplier raises prices to reduce demand to balance things out. There it is. Thank you. More money dumped into the stock market in the last 5 months than in the last 12 years. It's keeping the stock market going up, although today doesn't look like a good day. I keep getting Robinhood notices that all my stocks are down. But this is happening more and more, and my suspicion is that we're starting to see inflation. Even as the government doesn't pay attention to it, prices are creeping up. Supply, you order stuff now, it takes 6 months to a year to get. Things are the supply chain is wiped out. We're going to see inflation, and it's probably going to happen during the Biden administration. And maybe it'll be the Harris administration by then, and they will blame Joe Biden for that because they got to protect Kamala Harris. Hello there. It is Erick Erickson here. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. Over to the Washington Free Beacon. Hours after mass shooting, Philly DA downplayed crime spike to liberal celebrities. This is from Colin Anderson. Hours after 8 people were shot in broad daylight outside a Philadelphia train station, the city's top law enforcement official downplayed a historic violent crime surge during a $1,000 a head re-election fundraiser with Hollywood and Democratic VIPs, according to audio obtained by the Washington Free Beacon. District Attorney Larry Krasner did not mention the tragic event in his virtual address to liberal celebrity John Legend, Democratic Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren, and wealthy liberal donors. Krasner did, however, paint critics of his progressive crime policies as ignorant, lamenting that they get their understanding of crime from watching Law and Order on television and hold irrational fears of werewolves running up and down the street. Needless to say, screams, ranting, and raving, there will be a crime wave, there will be werewolves running up and down the street, they're going to grab you people out of your house and take them out back, Krasner said of the response to his progressive bail reforms, except no, that's not what happened. The comments come as Philadelphia experiences a record surge in homicides, with Krasner minimized as purely pandemic-induced and unrelated to his policies. But homicide rates have increased every year since Krasner took office in 2018, jumping to a 30-year high in 2020. Philadelphia is now on pace to experience its deadliest year in history in 2021. Those stats put the city at the low end of the terribleness going on nationally, Krasner claimed during a fundraiser. Now, I want to jump to a piece by Jonah Goldberg in his G-File over at the Dispatch. This is Goldberg writing. Let me give you a pithy summation of Lyndon Johnson's presidency. LBJ came in like a roaring lion and went out like the kind of mangy lion who could get his butt kicked by a surly lamb. Between the political capital he inherited from JFK's assassination and his own formidable political skill, he racked up an impressive string of transformative accomplishments from the Great Society to the Civil Rights Act. He left office a beaten man, opting not to run again. His party was torn apart by internal fights, his political capital drained like a hacked ATM by Vietnam and racial unrest. I bring this up because in the months prior to President Biden's inauguration, I often asked guests on my podcast if they thought a Biden presidency would be more like the first 2 years of the LBJ administration or the last 2 years. Right now, it looks like the first 2 years at a minimum. Heck, Biden seems to think that sets the bar too low. A bunch of historians told him he could be the next FDR, and he's going for it. I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. I've been writing for years that the Democratic Party is addicted to New Dealism. Harry Truman wanted his own New Deal, the Fair Deal. Kennedy wanted his New Frontier. LBJ, the only New Dealer other than FDR himself to be president, got his New Deal in the form of the Great Society. Clinton wanted one in his New Covenant. Obama tried his New Foundation. Indeed, whenever there's a crisis, real or imagined, the call goes forth for yet another New Deal. Jimmy Carter didn't call for a New Deal, but he did believe the energy crisis was the moral equivalent of war, which is sort of the same thing. In the wake of 9/11, Chuck Schumer argued in the Washington Post, the New Deal is upon us. The president can either lead the charge or be run over by it. And of course, climate change requires a Green New Deal. Now, as someone who thinks we didn't need the first New Deal, or at least a lot of it, it should surprise you that I certainly don't think we need a second one, never mind a third one if you count the Great Society, or the fourth one if you count the second New Deal. That actually raises an important point. In a sense, there wasn't even a first New Deal. Imagine you're some kind of alien watching the growth of government, not just in terms of spending, but in terms of scope and intrusion. On some fancy TV with the sound off, you'd see a big spike around the Civil War, and then it'd trend down until Teddy Roosevelt. Then it'd suddenly start to tick up. Then there'd be a huge spike with Woodrow Wilson before another welcome downward slope. It would pick up again under Hoover. That's right, under Hoover. As Rexford Tugwell, one of the most prominent brain trust New Dealers, once remarked, when it was all over, I once made a list of New Deal ventures begun during Hoover's years as Secretary of Commerce and then as president. The New Deal owed much to what he had begun. Of course, FDR oversaw an even bigger spike, and we look at that and we call it the New Deal, but that stuff was a grab bag. By FDR's own account, his New Deal was about experimentation, doing whatever seemed like a good idea at the moment. Some stuff was good, some arguably good, some bad, the rest arguably bad, but it wasn't some coherent program with a serious public policy theory stitching it together. To look upon these programs as the result of a unified plan, wrote Raymond Malloy, FDR's right-hand man during much of his presidency, was to believe that the accumulation of stuffed snakes, baseball pitchers, school flags, old tennis shoes, carpenter's tools, geometry books, and chemistry sets in a boy's bedroom could have been put there by an interior decorator. When Alvin Hansen, an influential economic advisor to FDR, was asked in 1940 whether the basic principle of the New Deal was economically sound, he responded, "I really do not know what the basic principle of the New Deal is." If you take the New Deal in its totality from FDR's first 100 days through his radical Second Bill of Rights State of the Union address, the underlying vision behind it was that the government in Washington should manage the economy and society itself from above with big businesses, trade associations, labor unions, state governments, even the Catholic Church as junior partners in the endeavor. This is the real definition of corporatism, not government by big business, but government defined by the enlightened collusion of the majority stakeholders run by the existing elites. It was the idea that markets were dumb, markets caused the depression after all, and experts were not just smart, but smarter than the market. And when I say the market, I mean that in the broad sense, as in the people making personal and group decisions about how to run not just their business, but their lives. The New Deal itself was a continuation of Woodrow Wilson's war socialism, which yoked all major institutions to a single cause: its status. Now, I say this, and this is very important. What Joe Biden seems to be doing here is as ad hoc as what Franklin Roosevelt did. In fact, Goldberg writes about this. His conception of infrastructure is very New Deal-y. So many people said, oh, that $400 billion that is being proposed for the home care workers or the home care sector, that's not really infrastructure. White House economist Cecilia Rouse argues, well, I beg to differ. I can't go to work if I don't have someone who's taking care of my parents or my kid. I can't go to work either without pants on, Goldberg writes. That doesn't mean the government should launch a pants buying business as part of infrastructure. Here's the thing. We're in a crime wave. Crime is going up in Dallas, Texas, in Houston, Texas, in Austin, Texas, in Atlanta, Georgia, in Macon, Georgia, in Savannah, Georgia, in New York City, in Albany, New York, in Buffalo, New York, in Des Moines, Iowa. Crime is going up. Crime is going up in Democrat-controlled cities. More precisely, where crime is most going up is places where George Soros's advocacy for progressive district attorneys was engaged. We've seen this in areas of Georgia, in Texas, in California, in Florida. Around the country, George Soros targeted district attorney races. And he poured money into local district attorney races around the country to find progressives who could win to push some level of left-wing criminal justice reform. And if you mention this, you're declared an anti-Semite because anything having to do with George Soros, immediately the media pounces and says, well, you hate Jews if you're going after George Soros really because you hate Jews. It's remarkable. The most anti-Semitic press in a generation, the American Press Corps, suddenly labels you an anti-Semite if you bring up George Soros, who objectively poured money into district attorney races around the country. And those district attorneys, including in Philadelphia, have sparked a crime wave through lack of enforcement, through blaming the police, through making police the bad guys. Now, police aren't infallible. Police do have problems. Police aren't perfect, but they shouldn't be vilified either. They certainly shouldn't be targeted by activists who are increasingly harassing them. Now, there's a tie-in here to New York. In New York, believe it or not, the two candidates who are doing the best out there are two candidates who are standing up and taking on crime. Andrew Yang and Eric Adams. Andrew Yang, yes, that Andrew Yang. He ran for president. He's in New York now. He's running for mayor. And do you know what he's doing? He's talking like a woke progressive, but he's also talking about how business is necessary and not bad. Capitalism is good, even if he doesn't like raw, unfettered capitalism. But also that there's a crime problem and people aren't safe. Instead of, now this is an Asian man, Andrew Yang, instead of going on and on like Bill de Blasio on white supremacy sparking anti-Asian violence, Andrew Yang is actually talking about how we got mental illness issues. I mean, the guy who stomped on the Filipino woman had been let out of prison after stabbing his mother to death. Why is that guy on the streets unmonitored? And clearly has mental issues. In fact, there's a slate of Asian hate crimes in New York, not by white people. Listen, this is from the New York Daily News, not a conservative publication. This is from Harry Siegel of the New York Daily News. Flipping through the paper on Friday, you could read about a young Asian man who was at the Home Depot in East New York when a man brandished a 2x4 and asked his girlfriend, "Why you with that little blank Asian blank?" I know I can't say those words on radio. While telling him, "I'll cut you, you effing Asian. Don't call anybody. I'm a blood. I'll shoot you." A young Asian woman in Manhattan's Chinatown eating ice cream outside while speaking Mandarin with a friend when she was slapped by a woman screaming, "Go back to your country." A middle-aged Asian man waiting for a train on the Upper West Side when a man yelled, "If you're not Bruce Lee, then F off," and hit him. And in Brooklyn, an elderly Asian man shopping for groceries when he was shoved to the ground without warning by a man who had previously shoved one Asian woman to the ground and pinned another to a storefront and grabbed her hair as he tried to punch her in the face. The subway attacker, who remained in the station and was promptly arrested, had been released last month after being charged with sexual abuse for allegedly touching a 68-year-old Asian woman's leg. The Brooklyn attacker is not racist, but off his meds and on Pluto, according to his siblings. The other two are still at large as I write this, but it's a safe bet that they're also mentally ill, violently antisocial, or both. It's becoming a problem. Some of these attacks were by white people, a lot of them not. If you listen to Mayor de Blasio on most of the politicians competing to replace him, you'd get the idea that the only thing we need to stop these attacks is to reject Donald Trump, and that the police are, if anything, part of the problem. After spa workers were massacred in Atlanta last month, I wrote about the double consciousness W.E.B. Du Bois described more than a century ago, and that East Asians are feeling now, the sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of others. Amid a wave of attacks are targeting Orthodox Jews last year, I wrote about the doublethink from the city's supposed progressive Pauls who like to march against hate and Trump while pretending the Brooklyn Bridge in 2021 is the Edmund Pettus Bridge in 1965. If they're not offering answers to profound and difficult questions about treating people with mental illness and violent criminal records with human decency while also keeping everyone else here reasonably safe, then railing against white supremacy isn't about dismantling systems of oppression so much as it is dodging tough questions. This guy points out that the two candidates at the top of the polls in New York, Andrew Yang and Eric Adams, are, this is direct quote, the only leading candidates talking about policing as anything more than a threat in its own right to public safety. These politicians don't want to talk about mental health problems. They don't want to talk about actually keeping bad guys in jail. They want to talk about letting them out. They want to talk about white supremacy. They want to talk about Donald Trump as the cause of all problems in America. But there are real problems, and it gives lie to the fact that the bulk of Asian violence in this country, by the way, it's overstated. It is overstated. It happens, but the way the media talks about it, you would think it was happening as a massive wave. It's not. But when it happens, it is overwhelmingly by young black men doing it. Now, if you were here on Friday, I talked about the college professor at the University of Boulder, the Asian woman, the head of the Asian Studies Department, who said that it's white supremacy, that even when a black person attacks an Asian person, or when a Hispanic person attacks an Asian person, it's actually white supremacy that makes them do it. The left lacks the sanity and lacks the reasonableness to deal with these problems. And the result is a crime wave around the country. And that, more than anything else, is why you're seeing Black and Asian and Hispanic people moving to the right. Law and order issues, something as basic as that. I mean, what is the basic role of government in this country? It's to keep you safe so you can live your life. When the government can't keep you safe because the George Soros elected local DA to the president of the United States refuses to actually deal with the problem at hand and distracts with, oh, it's racism, homophobia, transphobia, whatever, as opposed to stop the person from kicking in my front door and robbing me, people are going to vote Republican. You've got corporations and the government working together to make everything about different phobias, when the fact of the matter is, whether you're in a Black community or white community, you need the police to help keep you safe. And the white elite in this country, no, we're going to defund the police because they're bigots. Well, you know, the young Black couple in their neighborhood would very much like the police to show up and help keep them safe. And the response is, I got to go buy a gun now because the police can't be here. And the response from the left is, well, now we're going to take your gun. The greatest thing the Republicans and the conservative movement in this country have going for them is the left. And the left is in such a bubble, they don't get that more and more people are coming to the right, not because they're racists, but because they're scared of all the dark, dangerous, bad things out there that could come in the middle of the night and rob them. You've got Black families, Hispanic families, and Asian families in this country rapidly moving to Donald Trump's party because they know the Republicans will keep them safe and the Democrats will just guilt them.
You can follow Erick around social media at
Well, turns out the Chinese vaccine isn't going according to plan. Chinese officials are admitting that the protection rate of existing vaccines are not high. Gao Fu, director of the Chinese Center for Disease Control and Prevention, told a conference in the southwestern city of Chengdu on Saturday Notice we're not hearing about the rise of the vaccine. I mean, every country on earth has had another wave of the COVID vaccine. Notice how we're not hearing that in China. Now, Gao Fu listed two options to solve the problem. One is to increase the number of doses or adjust the dosage or interval between shots. The other is to mix vaccines developed from different technologies. Gao's remarks are a rare public admission from the country's top health official that the efficacy of China's coronavirus vaccines is not ideal and improvements are needed to boost protection. China has positioned itself as a leader in vaccine development and distribution, promoting and supplying the vaccines to countries all around the globe. But the relative low efficacy rate of its vaccines could hamper credibility and dent Beijing's so-called vaccine diplomacy. The two pharmaceutical firms that supply the majority of Chinese COVID-19 vaccines to the world have not published comprehensive clinical trial data in medical journals, but interim results announced by the companies show that their efficacy falls far behind the new type of vaccines developed in the West using mRNA technology, Pfizer and Moderna in particular, even Johnson & Johnson. Now, I bring up this story for a very particular reason. If you listen to much of the press corps in the West, particularly in the United States, China is some sort of country we need to model after. What's his name? Tom Friedman in the New York Times has an absolute, I mean, the man has Chinese priapism. I mean, it has lasted more than 4 hours, and instead of calling a doctor, he continues to write the same column over and over again in the New York Times and publish books on his absolute obsession with China. And, you know, the Chinese rail system is the greatest in the world. We need to be like China, the rail system. They can build a high-speed rail from Shanghai to Tibet, and they can build the whole thing in a year. Pay no attention to the fact that it literally collapsed. Literally, it collapsed. Or the great Chinese aircraft carrier. Remember the aircraft carrier last year? The much heralded Chinese aircraft carrier? It went to sea for the first time to compete against American nuclear aircraft carriers. And it probably caught fire. Or now the vaccine. China is not a paper tiger, but it's closer to a paper tiger than anything else. There are certainly substantive threats from China, but the American media's obsession with how awesome China is, how much better it is than us, how much more advanced it is, how much more technically capable it is, how its command and control economy is dominant. When you actually scratch the surface, you see there are deep flaws in all of that, and Chinese infrastructure is not as great as they claim it to be. They can't even get the vaccine right. What's so remarkable about that is that, you know, there's now this demand around the world to hurry up and get the vaccine to keep mutations of the virus from spreading. And a lot of countries grabbed hold of the Chinese vaccine, and now that vaccine isn't actually keeping people from being immune from the virus, unlike the American vaccines. It's remarkable that this isn't getting widespread attention, but then so much of the media is now in China's pocket, they've got to censor their own news. Hello and welcome. It is Erick Erickson here. Delighted to have you with me today. The phone number, if you wish to call in, 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. Now, I need you to know, if you go to ewerickson.com, you can, in fact, get my recipes. You can see my daily email. You can find out where the show is aired. In Austin, in Athens, Georgia. Sorry, brain fart there. Athens, Georgia. We're now noon to 3. We're over in Tyler, Texas, 11 to 2 Central now, noon to 3 Eastern this week, and we're just continuing to expand the show. Very excited to be stretching across the nation now. As always, you can email me, Erick at ewerickson.com. And again, the show number 877-973-7425. What are we going to do about the woke corporations? The Wall Street Journal reports that CEOs are planning a new push on voting legislation as Texas begins consideration of its election reform package. Now, you need to understand what happened in Texas, because it's very relevant what happened in Georgia as well. Now, let's jump back to what happened in Georgia before we move forward to Texas. One of the things that happened in Georgia, let's take the feeding and watering of voters in line. It has been against the law in Georgia for decades to engage with voters standing in line within 150 feet of the polling location. You had candidates who were running for office wearing campaign T-shirts show up with pizzas and bottles of water and give them to the voters standing in line. You had Planned Parenthood activists in Planned Parenthood T-shirts passing out bottles of water labeled with Planned Parenthood. You had Stacey Abrams, Fair Fight Georgia, doing the same thing. And local Democratic election officials looked at the rules and they said, well, giving food and water isn't really electioneering, even though it said things of value given to voters at the polls within 150 feet was against the law. They said that food and water wasn't actually that. So the state legislature in Georgia has clarified now that, in fact, food and water is part of that, and you can't give food and water within 150 feet of the polls except through unmonitored water stations and food. And outside of 150 feet, you can have food trucks and beer if you want, so long as you get the permitting required. You just got to stay 25 feet from the line. I personally would be much more invested in going to vote if I knew I could get a taco and beer while I stand in line. Well, now it's moved to Texas. The fight has moved to Texas as the Texas legislature is considering election reform measures there. Now, here's what happened in Texas. In Houston, in Dallas, in Austin, in other progressive enclaves, and Houston, the actual city center areas move more and more to the left. Dallas has, Austin has always been, and more so now. You had local election officials try to say that the laws of the elections were vague. And they started doing 24-hour balloting, expanding voter access rules that were against the law. But they said, well, the law is vague, it's nebulous, it's overbroad. We can squeeze in these exceptions. They disrespected the law. The left disrespected the law. And the Texas legislature is responding to get rid of all the vagaries, because in large part, what happened is that they overwhelmed the judiciary with a bunch of lawsuits, and it was local judges who were also Democrats saying, you know what, nah, we're gonna allow this. You got to remember, in Texas, up until this last election, you could vote all or nothing, Republican or Democrat. And in 2018, a lot of popular elected officials at the local level were swept out of office by people they were mad at Donald Trump in 2018 and they voted Democrat. And of course, that set the entire media agenda in 2020 that Texas was going to go left. Texas was going to turn blue. Texas was going to be overwhelmed with the Democrats. And it didn't turn out that way. The Republicans didn't lose any congressional seats at all. They held the state legislature in Texas. And they did remarkably well. But because in 2018, people could just check the box Democrat, well, a lot of local judges who were popular, they got swept out by progressives who were running against them. And those progressive judges said, hey, you know what? We're going to allow these local Democrats to take advantage of the so-called vagaries of the law and do crazy things. I mean, they had drive-through voting, all sorts of stuff. Now, here's the thing. The left will listen to this and they will say, well, shouldn't we make it easier to vote? No, we should make it easier to vote. I resent the insinuation that somehow it's hard to vote, number one, and number two, that we should make it even easier. We do not, on either side of the aisle, should we want stupid people to vote. And there are a lot of stupid people. I do not think we should make it as easy as possible to vote, because then we have a bunch of stupid people voting who don't even know who they're voting for. Oh, that candidate is handsome. I'm going to vote for him. No, you don't want people like that voting. Cut it out. You know, by the way, we used to, as a society, be able to agree we don't want the idiots voting. We got enough idiots who figured it out to vote. I absolutely fundamentally disagree with the idea that we should make voting as easy as possible. No, I do not think so. Because if you make it as easy as possible, you've got this herd mentality of people who are like, oh, my friends are going to go vote today. I'm going to go vote too. Well, who are you voting for? I don't know who's on the ballot. Oh, I like that person's name. I'm going to vote for that person. You have this happen. You know this happen. You know people. Just stop denying it. You know these idiots who vote like that. Oh, he's so beautiful. I'm going to vote for him. Like the Democrats who voted for John Edwards back in the day. Remember him? He was the vice presidential candidate for John Kerry. What was the left loved his wife. She was the progressive darling. He just had good hair. They called him the Breck girl. Turned out he was cheating on his wife, knocked up some woman, and the left's, I can't believe it. He was the second coming of John Kennedy. It's always on the left, John Kennedy. He looks like John Kennedy. No one knows who John Kennedy looks like anymore, other than he was like banging all the supermodels back in the day, and that's why so many people on the left liked him. It's absolutely ridiculous. The lionization on the left of John Kennedy, and then John Edwards, and now Beto O'Rourke too. He's got Kennedy-esque looks, says the media. That's apparently the defining characterization for a credible person to vote for. He's got Kennedy-esque good looks. Never mind, he's an idiot. I mean, that guy, I feel sorry for the people of Texas. He says he's not going to run against Greg Abbott, but I have a sneaking suspicion he is, because it's pretty clear he doesn't like his family. And I don't say that lightly. I don't want to drag them into it. But if you ever read these profiles of Beto O'Rourke, the guy is like a listless 40 or 50-year-old who skateboards and drops the F-bomb and can't acknowledge the fact that he's actually not a teenager anymore. I mean, and then he like floats around the country so he doesn't have to deal with his wife and kids. No responsibility. That guy doesn't want any responsibility. And the left line, he's Kennedy-esque good looks. We don't want people voting who think that's a good idea. And the left in Texas took advantage of what they called vagary. So now the Texas legislature is having to be the bad guy and say, no, these things aren't vague. Let's make it really clear for you. You can't do this crap. And of course, we're going to protest and boycott Texas like we did in Georgia. You got Stacey Abrams gearing up for battle. And now they've got the CEOs out there. Dozens of chief executives and other senior leaders gathered on Zoom this weekend to plot what several said big businesses should do next about new voting laws underway in Texas and other states. Can I just pause with the irony here and note that they're on a Zoom call? Zoom, a company notorious for routing video chats through China and potentially censoring phone calls for China. Yeah, they're they're so worried about our democracy, they're willing to get on that platform. Ken Chenault, the former chief executive of American Express, and Kenneth Frazier, CEO of Merck, urged the leaders to collectively call for greater voting access, according to several people who attended. Mr. Chenault and Frazier cautioned businesses against dropping the issue and asked CEOs to sign a statement opposing what they view as discriminatory legislation on voting, the people said. A statement could come early this week, the people said, and would build on one that 72 black executives signed last month in the wake of changes to Georgia's voting law. Mr. Chenault said told executives on the call that several leaders had signaled they would sign on, including executives at Pepsi, PayPal, T. Rowe Price, and Hess Corp., among others, according to the people. PayPal confirmed it has signed the statement. Pepsi, T. Rowe Price, and Hess didn't immediately respond to requests for comment. As more companies and their leaders have spoken out on the issue in recent weeks, their stands have drawn the ire of Republican state and federal legislators who say companies are miscasting the matter and shouldn't act as shadow lawmakers. Meanwhile, progressive activists and others who oppose the laws have said that the actions leaders are taking aren't strong enough. Many CEOs now feel a duty or pressure to make their views explicitly known to employees and others. Plenty of companies remain weary of wading into politically charged areas. One executive from a Fortune 100 consumer products company said board members, employees, and vendors are pressing leaders to speak out, but doing so could put a bullseye on the company. It's really a no-win situation from a corporate standpoint, the executive said. Atlanta Falcons owner Arthur Blank, who owns Atlanta United and the PGA Tour Superstore, said on the call he believes a large share of fans of the NFL, Major League Soccer, and PGA want the groups to make their positions known on voting rights. He's a co-founder of Home Depot. Now, he says that they should have done more since Colin Kaepernick spoke out. Of course, Starbucks is urging it as well. Some leaders spoke out in favor of signing on to this new statement, including AMC Entertainment Holdings and others. These woke corporations are doing the bidding of the left, pressuring people. Ed Bastain, the CEO of Delta, of course, got into this. He targeted the NRA earlier, and now he's targeting these voting laws. But what's so funny here, and what's so remarkable, is that these companies are essentially trying to have their cake and eat it too. They're not really standing up before the laws are passed. Like, take the Georgia situation. Now, Apple, Amazon, and Dell have come out and blasted Texas for doing what Texas is about to do. And by the way, the Texas legislature should stand up and do this. Do not be bullied by corporate America. It's not like they're going to pack up and leave your state. They threaten it, but they won't. Why? Because Texas is awesome. They're not going to leave. Same with Georgia. These companies, it's not like Delta is going to uproot from Atlanta all of a sudden. And with Delta and with Coca-Cola in Georgia, they waited until the law was passed. And then they seal-clapped it until the wokes got mad at them. They're like, we condemn this law that we praised on Friday. Jeffrey Lord over at the American Spectator has this piece. Boycotting is usually not a tactic of conservatives, yet it worked wonderfully well in the 1960s civil rights era. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. used the boycott quite famously and to great effect. Requesting ID to vote, as the new Georgia law does, and which Major League Baseball and some of its sponsors are protesting, is decidedly not racist. Both Delta Airlines and Coca-Cola demand ID to enter Delta's airline and Coke's shareholder meetings. Are they racist? Well, using their standards of what qualifies as Jim Crowism, as President Biden claims them, and as I noted in the American Spectator earlier this week, they are. In boycotting the majority black Atlanta and 30% of small businesses in Atlanta that are minority owned by moving the All-Star game out of the city, Major League Baseball, with its woke moral condescension, made itself a laughable spectacle. Another Wall Street Journal columnist, Karl Rove, outlined exactly why it was devastating. He went on to note exactly what's happening with woke corporate tycoons. They didn't bother to do their research in wading into a political battle that details of which are way over their head. Rove noted that Manfred, the commissioner of baseball, had dropped his sport into red-hot controversy based on imaginary facts and flawed assertions. Put another way, Manfred doesn't know what he's talking about. Now, will conservatives boycott? I don't know. Now, I've talked to individuals who say, yes, we're going to boycott these companies. I've got to take my dad to Florida in a couple of weeks. His younger brother, his last surviving sibling, has not been in good health. My dad wants to get down there and see him, so I've got to take him over there. We're using Delta. I've got Sky Miles. I can do it. I'm not boycotting Delta. It's the best airline in the country as far as I'm concerned. Coca-Cola, I drink Dr. Pepper, so no loss there for me. But some of these corporations, I do think at some point conservatives are going to have to unite and pick a company. All of us together pick a company and say, we will not, as conservatives, as Christians, will work with churches. We won't do business with this company. Because these companies are wading into areas on behalf of wokes. They don't really understand what's at stake. They don't really understand the laws. They're believing the mischaracterizations from the left. And they take for granted conservative dollars. They're scared of Boko Haram, the left-wing terrorist social justice movement. They're scared of China, so they'll do China's bidding. They'll do the bidding of the wokes, and they just take our money for granted. Well, conservatives will never boycott. I'm not an advocate of boycotts, and I'm starting to think we're going to have to pick a company and boycott. I don't know which one, though. Maybe pick one I don't like and do that one. I don't know. But, I mean, at some point, they keep taking us for granted. They keep wanting to weigh in on this nonsense, and they keep taking the side of Woko Haram and the left-wing talking points without any thought as to maybe the wokes got it wrong. At some point, our voices are going to have to be heard. And, you know, the other thing they're collaborating on is punishing Republicans generally. I'll bring you the details on that when we come back.
I really do like his opinion on things.
Welcome back. It is Erick Erickson here. The phone number is 877-97-ERICK, E-R-I-C-K, 877-973-7425. Hideki Matsuyama has won the Masters. I did not get to watch the end of it. It's normally like the one golf game I make a point to watch and didn't get to really spend time with the game this time. He's the first Japanese man to win the major title. And naturally, the media has rushed to tie it into anti-Asian hate, of course. But what's so amazing here is that a group of people have been posting pictures online. The dude was at the Atlanta airport flying to Chicago on United and had his green jacket draped over his seat and was just playing on his phone No big deal, just hanging out of the gate like a normal person. Now he's one that, I mean, literally had his green jacket draped over the chair in the airport on his way back to Chicago. The New York Times actually has an interesting story on the $1.50 sandwich at the Masters, the pimento cheese sandwich, and that it's not just about hospitality. Instead, it's a low-cost way to cultivate one of the biggest brands in American sports. Jose Maria Olazabal hit a tee shot at Augusta National Golf Course's 12th hole one day this week, jokingly bowed to the spectators and meandered toward the green of one of the greatest holes in golf. Much of the gallery swiftly headed towards one of the great bargains in sports, the Amen Corner concession stand, where fans at the Masters can come buy a meal, sandwich, soft drink, and a cookie for as little as $5. What's so interesting is that they spell buy, B-Y, instead of B-U-Y, at the New York Times. The famously controlling club has spent decades accepting that it cannot control the weather. But economic forces surrounding the tournament are well within reason, and so the price of a pimento cheese sandwich has stood at $1.50 since 2003. Adjusted for inflation, and assuming the sandwich was appropriately priced to begin with, it should be about $2.14. Economists believe the enduring bargain, at odds with an era of sticker shock prices at many athletic events, is not merely a matter of Southern hospitality. Instead, they see hard-nosed, soft power genius, a thrifty way to cultivate the mystique that has helped make the Masters brand one of the most valuable in sports. So, in other words, if the Masters did like all the other sporting franchises out there, it would keep jacking up the cost of things. The most expensive thing on the menu at the Masters is beer. $5 for a beer at the Masters. The pimento cheese sandwich should cost way more than it does. They're arguably losing games, but you know, you can do a $150 package and get a plastic cup, 25 plastic cups, pimento cheese sandwiches, pulled pork, and chocolate chip cookies delivered to your door, courtesy of the Masters. And everything is in the green wrappers, so if the litter falls on the ground, it blends in with the grass, so you can't see it on TV. It doesn't disrupt it. It is a perfectly organized, perfectly packaged event. I mean, it really is. The course itself is stunning. Now, notice there's no reporting of Major League Baseball's commissioner giving up his membership to Augusta National. He's moved the All-Star game out of Atlanta. I saw some sports commentator point out that baseball has been harder on Georgia for passing an election reform bill than it has been on the Astros for cheating.
30.
Not a unfair point. And the New York Times clearly is at pains to cover fairly the genius of Augusta. They had to go out of their way to point out critics loathe Augusta National, and yet their marketing is genius. It really is. Now the winner is carrying his jacket around the Atlanta airport. Hello there, it is Erick Erickson here. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. If you're just tuning in, I mentioned in the first hour, I have sat here during commercial break, and I have looked outlet to outlet, and it is remarkable how none of them have covered that Joe Biden's borders are, southern border, whatever, that she, after 80 days in the White House, is announcing her retirement. And it comes on the same day she announced the Biden administration has decided to pay illegal aliens south of the border money to keep them from coming to the United States. It's one reason I do my daily newsletter, to cover stuff that the media doesn't want to cover. If you want to see these two and in fairness, so Axios covered her retirement and Reuters covered the cash payments. But what they do is they bury them on a Friday afternoon when you're distracted by the Masters, and they don't follow up. I mean, they one story out there, and then that's it. If you want to see the story, if you want to see links to them, text the word data to 33777. I've got both stories in my email newsletter. You should really, I mean, this is remarkable. She's retiring after 80 days on the job. They won't acknowledge that they're firing her, but that's essentially what it is, that they finally realize they got a crisis on their hands. Again, the text the word data to 33777. You can see this stuff. We got to talk about what's happening in Michigan. Gretchen Whitmer was on television this weekend talking about her policies and all of her excuse making now.
Well, let me start by saying this. You know, we did not have a national strategy for a long period of time. And then the Biden White House came in and we have one. And by and large, it's working and they're doing a great job. I would submit, though, that in an undertaking of this magnitude with such consequence, it's important to recognize where there might need to be some adjustments along the way. We are seeing a surge in Michigan, despite the fact that we have some of the strongest policies in place, mask mandates, capacity limits, working from home. We've asked our state for a 2-week pause. So despite all of that, we are seeing a surge because of these variants. And that's precisely why we're really encouraging them to think about surging vaccines into the state of Michigan. And I'm going to continue to fight for the people.
She's going to continue to fight for the people, but she's not going to keep them locked in their homes anymore. Think of all of the hysteria when Greg Abbott let Texas go back to normal. You had, he was like Brian Kemp. When Brian Kemp opened the state of Georgia, he was going to have blood on his hands. The Atlantic did a story about Kemp being the first governor to reopen his state, that Georgia was doing an experiment in human sacrifice. A month ago, Greg Abbott reopened Texas, and suddenly you had blood on his hands. Left-wing activists claiming that the governor of Texas had blood on his hands for the audacity of getting rid of the mask mandate, and the data in Texas looks really, really good. In fact, while the United States is trending up, it's almost single-handedly because of Michigan. Michigan's skyrocketing rate, and New York, by the way, its skyrocketing rate, it's remarkable what we're seeing in numbers. Michigan's 14-day total, it's a skyrocket. New Jersey is up. Minnesota is up. New York is up. And actually, New York is just trending down. And then you've got states where cases are low. That includes Georgia and Texas and Alabama and Arkansas and Kansas and Missouri and Mississippi. Now, let's focus on Texas and Mississippi. Texas and Mississippi on the same day reopened their states for business and got rid of their mask mandates. The media said there would be blood on their hands. And it's not them, it's Michigan. In Michigan, you will recall when small business owners decided they wanted to reopen, they held a protest, and the media vilified them. You had, what's her name, Brooke Baldwin on CNN. I think it was her. She's now out of a job at CNN. She wanted to go even further left than CNN was comfortable, apparently. And she blasted those small business owners and essentially said that it was white privilege or some such. Then you had other people out there saying that these white business owners, if they wanted their small businesses reopened, they needed to sign waivers for their protests and say they would not take a ventilator if they got COVID and needed a vent, that they would die because they were being selfish. Fast forward just a month and a half to the George Floyd protests, and suddenly it was heroic to defy the orders, the pandemic orders, and it was just perfectly fine to march shoulder to shoulder in the streets and burn down businesses across America, and then the mostly peaceful protests, no less, to protest George Floyd. The small business owners wanting to get back to work, no, they were terrible, but the people who wanted to burn down America, they were fine. Burn down some of those small businesses along the way. And now you've got Anthony Fauci out there with this muddied, terrible message on the vaccine. I want to get to his audio, but one more point on Whitmer. Whitmer kept everybody locked down in Michigan. She's finally let them slowly reopen, and cases are skyrocketing. Joe Biden won't send her more vaccine, and now she can't shut the state back down. And what the media is dancing around, the New York Times, you had to read the New York Times story of this and get to the very bottom of the story. Like 1,000 words, you had to get to the bottom to find out the election's coming and Whitmer's worried. In other words, she can't lock people back down because she's afraid she'll lose re-election if she doesn't. She's making a political decision. Now, when Georgia and Texas and Mississippi and Florida and Arizona and the like, when they were reopening, the media highlighted the politics of it. Pay no attention to the small business owners losing their jobs. Pay no attention to the unemployment rate. Pay no attention to the school children falling behind. It was all politics. It was all politics. With Whitmer, however, they're trying to make her some martyr to reasonable good sense when, in fact, because she kept people locked down, frankly, you couldn't even get to herd immunity in the state. And now you get this rapid progression of the virus as people come out, and they're lagging behind other states in vaccine rollout. Well, it doesn't help that you got Dr. Fauci out there with this.
Well, I would just get back to what the president said even before he was inaugurated, that we need a universal wearing of masks. He said for at least 100 days, it may well go beyond 100 days. Everyone should be wearing a mask. They should avoid congregate settings. They should keep their distance, and they should wash their hands as often as possible. We are not out of this yet. We had 80,000 new infections the other day. Now's not the time to declare victory prematurely. We have not won this yet. We will win it, but we haven't won it yet.
There's that, but then there's also this. Now, pay really close attention to the soundbite.
No, it's still not okay for the simple reason that the level of infection, the dynamics of infection in the community are still really disturbingly high. Like just yesterday, there were close to 80,000 new infections, and we've been hanging around 60, 70, 75,000. So if you're not vaccinated, please get vaccinated as soon as vaccine becomes available to you. And if you are vaccinated, please remember that you still have to be careful and not get involved in crowded situations, particularly indoors where people are not wearing masks. And for the time being, until we show definitively that a person who's vaccinated does not get this subclinical infection and can spread to others, you should also continue to wear a mask for the time being.
You should continue to wear a mask for the time being. You should continue to socially distance. You should continue to do everything that you should have done and not change your life, but actually stay in lockdown even after you get the vaccine. Why is the message get the vaccine and then stay locked down? It seems like if you really want people to get this vaccine, what you need to be doing is telling people, hey, go get vaccinated and live your life. Go get vaccinated and live your life. What's so crazy is the alarm and the fear-mongering. Like, for example, let me read you. This is a Twitter thread from Zeynep Tufekci, who is a complex systems analyst and professor who writes in The Atlantic. This is about, in Israel, real-world evidence on the vaccines and vaccine protection and the different variants. And she writes, if anyone is going to write about the latest Israel variant study, I suggest noting the informative thread by one of the co-authors. This is actually excellent news. And the vaccine resistance is not analogous to antibiotic resistance. I've already been sent an alarming headline by a respectable organization of co-authors on Twitter explaining it. For what it's worth, the study itself made me feel better about the mRNA vaccines and the threat of the South African variant. Now, we got to call it B1351, because if we call it the South African variant like Reuters calls it and like CNN calls it, we're racist, just like with the Wuhan virus. You're not allowed to say that. But somehow the British strain is not racist. Here's a better headline for this, she says, adding that the finding about the vaccine breakthroughs are turning out to be really encouraging so far. While it appears that the Pfizer vaccines and others are not as good against the South African variant, those are in clinical trials. The variant, the South African variant, is not as common as people think, and that essentially, if you have people who are 100% guaranteed to be surrounded by the most infected people with the South African variant, then the South African variant can break through to people. But otherwise, it's very, very good. So, for example, there was a study, CNN talked about the 95% efficacy of the vaccine. And that, what are we going to do with people who are flying, who are vaccinated? They're still going to have to go through all these protocols. And it's still not safe, possibly, even though the CDC says it is, for them to travel. What multiple epidemiologists are pointing out about this hype of, oh my gosh, the vaccinated, they can still get the virus, is that yes, in a clinical setting, when exposed to a massive dose of the virus, 5% of people can still get infected. Got that again? In a clinical setting, with a massive potent dose of the virus, 5% of people can get infected who have been vaccinated. In the real world, if you're on an airplane, in order to get infected with the virus, you need to have the vaccine, and literally every single person on the plane needs to have the virus, and the air conditioner needs to be broken so there's no airflow. And you might get infected. You've got a 5% chance of getting infected in that scenario. In the real world scenario, where airplanes have air conditioners that are surgical center qualified, if not better, you're not going to get the virus on the plane. If you're surrounded, if the person next to you has COVID and you're vaccinated, you're not going to get infected. In fact, Sean Trendy, who writes for Real Clear Politics, notes this: the reporting on these studies is dangerous. The type of reporting generates clicks, but reduces confidence in the vaccines, reduces vaccination rates. Bad news about the vaccine should be reported, but we should be triply sure it's actually bad. The more I think about it, the angrier I get. The basic narrative about the vaccines is becoming, you can't stop wearing masks, tons of other people aren't getting them, and oh, by the way, the variants are possibly going to render the vaccine useless. And then in 3 weeks, we're going to be standing here wondering why the lines for the vaccine are empty. If you can't change your life and go back to normal after the vaccine, what's the point of getting the vaccine? And yet this is the narrative from the media and the government, which essentially at this point is just telling people that the government still wants to control you. Michael Osterholm was on Meet the Press. Listen to this, the spin of it. I want to read you some of his transcript. This is with Chuck Todd. Let me say that at this time, we really are in a Category 5 hurricane status with regard to the rest of the world. At this point, we will see in the next 2 weeks the highest number of cases reported globally since the end of the pandemic. In terms of the United States, we're just at the beginning of the surge. We haven't even begun to see the fourth surge yet. And then he says, let me give you an example on an airplane flight. When you get vaccinated, it's like buying a fireproof suit that works 90 to 95% of the time, but it doesn't work all the time. So why would you want to walk into a big fire if you don't have to? This B117 variant, that's the UK strain, that we've talked about, it's 50 to 100% more infectious. It causes more severe illnesses 50 to 60% of the time. It's almost like having a whole new pandemic descend on us. But here's the thing. This guy has been out there saying that we are in the darkest days of the pandemic. And yet the 7-day average has actually gotten better in the United States, even as it's going back up. It's nothing like what he said. But then here's the other thing. If it's 90 to 95% effective, the odds of you getting the virus are actually slim to none. And that's in a clinical setting. So the tale from the government and from the epidemiological, scientific, academic community is doom and gloom. It doesn't matter if you get the vaccine. They essentially don't want you to go back to living your normal life. And they resent like hell places like Texas and Georgia and Florida and Mississippi, where those states have said, we're open for business. Go about your life. Take reasonable precautions you think are necessary for yourself. The government's not going to have to tell you to do it. And guess what's happening? As the vaccination rate goes up, the viral rate is going down, even in these open states. And the states like Michigan, where they've kept it locked up forever, the virus rate is going up. It's almost like maybe all along, with maybe a month to lock down and get hospital resources up to snuff, maybe otherwise we should just let people live their lives and decide for themselves what's safe and what's not safe. Because the states where people are deciding live and let live and do what in your best judgment is right, they're having better outcomes than the ones where everyone has to look to the nanny state and Uncle Sam and get permission. Uncle Sam, please, can I go outside today? Those are the people who are still getting the virus.
You can follow Erick around.
Welcome back. It is Erick Erickson here, the Erick Erickson Show across the nation. The phone number 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. Let's say you fry fish in the house, or fry French fries. It gets a little smelly. You know, the grease sometimes smells. You got the air conditioner on, you got the vents going to suck out the smell, but it kind of lingers. You need something to help get rid of the odor, and that something is the Eden Pure Thunderstorm. It's an air purifier. Now, it helps my son with his allergies. Y'all, I kid you not, since we've been using the Eden Pure in his room, he and I have terrible allergies. We get allergy shots, and we've been neglectful the last couple of weeks because just our schedules have been nuts with his soccer games and all. And we can put the Eden Pure Thunderstorm in his room, let it go at night, and in the morning he wakes up and he does not have this green goop coming out of his nose like he did before the Eden Pure. It really is a night and day difference. I can attest to it myself. In fact, he stole my Eden Pure and he won't give it back, so I had to order one my own. You can order one as well. If you need if this thing is portable, you can hold it in the palm of your hand. You can put it in your car with you. You can use a USB plug. It works. It really does. I can attest to it in my own house. Whether you're fish frying in the kitchen and you need something to help get rid of the odors, or your kid has allergies and needs something to help him sleep better at night, the Eden Pure Thunderstorm does it all. EdenPureDeals.com is the website. You'll get $10 off the lowest sale price if you use the word Erick, E-R-I-C-K, at checkout. It's Eden Pure, Eden like the Garden of Eden, EdenPureDeals.com. You get $10 off the lowest sale price when you use my name, Erick, at checkout. You can also see my name on the website when you go to EdenPureDeals.com. You can click it and go through. But get this Thunderstorm. It's great. It's affordable. It works. In fact, I know it works as well because I did do French fry-in last night and then got them inside. And I brought the oil pot inside, and it just I got to get a real outdoor fryer instead of taking my Dutch oven outside. I've got a side burner, but come inside, stink up the house. The Eden Pure works. It works better than the essential oil, but don't tell my wife. Okay. All right. We must move on before I get in trouble here. She's going to hear that. Can I just, do I have time? Yeah, I want to play this by Charlie Dent. Listen to this. Charlie Dent is the progressive Republican who's left Congress now, always sided with the Democrats, just briefly.
The party that espouses limited government should not be entering into these types of very complex and difficult medical decisions.
Now, he's talking about transgenderism, and Arkansas's Governor Asa Hutchinson vetoed legislation and was overridden that would ban gender-modifying surgeries on teens who are still going through hormone changes and the like. And Charlie Dent, a leftist who has never bought into the limited government message, the party of limited government should be doing this. I'm real sorry here, but when the transgender movement is out there bullying everyone else and silencing them, it's them who won't leave us alone, not us who won't leave them alone. The only reason conservatives are having to stand up and deal with this issue is because they've been so in-your-face aggressive about forcing boys onto girls' teams and doing genital mutilation to children who haven't even grown up yet. They played with a toy truck. Really, my daughter must be a boy. Somebody's got to stand up for these kids, and you can't expect the party of death that wants to just abort the kids to actually stand up and protect them. Somebody's got to. This is the perfect position for the party of limited government to keep the wokes out of the way of ruining our lives.